I'm very happy that he found time to come to us and is giving a very nice presentation today. I met Harlan Hughes for the first time. Yeah, it was 2 years ago when I was in LA for the first time, so I just dropped by his office, and the original contact was actually established through Harlan's brother Arison, who's a very innovative fashion designer in Munich. So that was actually the first link, and then I just stepped by and was very warmly welcomed in Harlan's office. Thebrain.com, I'm also surprised about, or I'm also curious about the latest development. There are rumors going on in Germany, everywhere actually, whether there's a collaboration with the NASA or whether CIA uses the brain in order to track down terrorists. So I'm very curious to hear about that, and just pass on to Harlan.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome, Harlan.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't really sure what to prepare for, so I just kind of got a quick download from Fabian. Unfortunately, I haven't had much time in the recent past to kind of catch up with him. So I'm going to be shooting from the hip a little bit here, and I'd like to try and make this as interactive as possible. I understand that we have about an hour and a half. I have probably around 45 minutes of things to demonstrate that I can walk through. But as we're doing that, I would encourage you to stop me and ask questions, or tell me what you want me to focus on, and we can try and make the best use out of this time. The brain is a technology which I developed the initial seeds of some 8-9 years ago now, and the inspiration for the idea was to try and create a technology which much better modeled the way that people think as a way to work with their information in their computers. If you think of how we've been working with computers for the last 30 years, this is it right here. You have desktops with folders and trash cans and inboxes and all of these metaphors which are so common in everyday life. And that was a good idea at the time when we were typing in commands, and you kind of had to have a prior knowledge of how everything worked before you could work with it. So visualizing everything and making it tangible was great. But that's only one step forward. And since then, the computer has really matured a lot in its capability and in the vastness of the amount of information that people need to deal with. However, we're still using the same interfaces, these files and folders and hierarchical structures, to try and organize the information and think about the way that we interact with it, the way that we process it, and how it affects other pieces of information. And in reality, the way that information is connected is much more of a network relationship. So the premise that I started with was that people need to be able to use their computers more effectively. And the way that I was experiencing other people interacting with computers was, highly unproductive. I thought that everyone was kind of missing the boat, if you will, because I started working with computers when I was very young, and I always kind of got it. I saw the computer as something that was a way for me to expand my mind and really turn my thoughts into a concrete reality inside the machineries of this box. But no one else thought that way. Everyone else looked at it and said, it's a typewriter with a screen on it, or it's a calculator, or it's a filing cabinet, or what have you. And the messaging that we were giving people with the interfaces was exactly that. So they wound up exactly where they should have. The premise behind the brain, of course, was to say, forget all that. Let's try and look at the computer as an extension of our minds. And let's try and build something which maps in a very close parallel to the way we think. And so I came up with the idea that you should have a network of connections, and each one of those connections, or each one of those nodes in the network, should be able to be attached to anything else, right? And as a result, we developed this product which we call Personal Brain now. And Personal Brain basically is a way for people to map out information, whether it's files, folders, web pages, documents, spreadsheets, pictures, all in a way that shows the relationships and the ways that they think about information. So in this example, what we have here is a consulting company which has mapped out all the different clients that they work with. Just turn that off. So I can come in here, and each time I select a piece of information inside of the brain, the display rearranges itself so that the central piece of information, or what I'm thinking about, comes to the center of the screen. Okay? I'm actually going to slow down the display here for a second. So whatever I select moves to the center of the screen, and I can see everything related to it. Now, the advantage to that over a file or folder is that when I take a file and I put it into a hierarchy, I basically say this piece of information belongs in this particular spot. But in so doing, I also say it doesn't belong anywhere else. With a network, of course, that's not a limitation. And because we have this visual display which rearranges itself based on whatever you are thinking about or whatever you selected, it's possible to connect one thing in multiple places. So for instance, what I've done here is I've gone down into the client section of this brain where they have mapped out all their different clients along two different paths. First of all, by the industry that a client is in, and then by the type of service that they're providing to the client. So for instance, if I were to go into an industry, say media and entertainment, I can then select one of those clients and see that this client has multiple projects, and one of these projects is in more than one place. It's not only under this client, it's also under their supply chain management service offering, right? So the multiple relationships that we have here allow somebody to discover that piece of information from many different contexts, okay? Whether they're approaching it from the type of engagement it was, the client it was, the person who was involved with it, or even the specific document that's related to it, okay? So each one of these thoughts now not only shows the network or the understanding of how everything is interconnected, but it also shows the detailed information which is associated with these things. So for instance, for this project, you can see here that we have an icon which represents a document. And when I click on that icon, it launches the application and opens up the document. So each one of these things can be associated with any piece of information on your computer, whether it's a spreadsheet or a web page or a document or even an email address. And by connecting them all together, we give people a much richer experience in terms of how they think about their information and how they connect it. So I'm not going to spend too much time going through the features of this. This is kind of our first level application. But I wanted to give you an introduction to that. And what we did was we released this product on the net in January of 1998. And when we did that, we basically thought that the primary use for the application was going to be for individuals to manage their own information, right? Everyone has a My Documents folder now, and they have a list of bookmarks in their browser, and they have their email where they have all their stuff. And it's all these kind of separated compartments that have nothing to do with how you actually think about the information, but a lot more to do about where it comes from, what application it's used with, and so forth. So this allows people to abstract out the meaning of that information and treat all information equally, if you will. Okay? And we believed that by giving people a superior way to organize their information, we would have a mass exodus from the desktop. Such was not quite the case, but we were reasonably successful. Since then, we've had over 500,000 people download the product. Mostly to very favorable reviews. And we have a significant portion of those people convert into sales and evangelists for us. But what we discovered pretty much as soon as we released the product was that the real value in organizing your information like this and presenting it as a network of information was that it was not just better for the individual who had organized the information, but it was also a better way to communicate that information. So, when I'm looking for something now, I can go in and just, the first thing that pops into my head that's related to that piece of information can serve as the path to finding that. So for instance, if I'm looking for information on a project that we did for a particular client, say Nokia, I can just type the first few letters and it'll take me right there. At that point, I can then get to everything related to that client, right? So another example would be a person. If you know a particular individual, you say, I met this person back at this conference the other day. I can't remember their name, but I really need to get into contact with them. Well, that person might be connected up to the conference. They might be connected up to the person that introduced you to them. There's all of these, all this myriad of connections that you can build. But that's of limited value if somebody really knows what they're doing and they're well organized by themselves. Where it becomes of a much more significant value is when you go to share that information. And we got a strong influx of demand from large companies, Fortune 500 companies in many cases, that were trying to build complex products or deliver complex services or work on complex problems where the relationships between information really provide a significant context for people being able to act on that information. And as a result, we developed tools for taking this structure and distributing it over the web. Does anyone have any questions so far? It's all making sense? Please.
Well, I have lots of stuff. I downloaded this about 2 years ago.
Okay.
But I don't want to jump ahead of the lecture. I'm just kind of interested in the graph dynamics of it. Have you ever thought of doing stuff like allowing for label connections or incorporating graph theory into the actual graph so you can have directed graphs or some sort of wave link or something like that?
Right, right. No, that's a good question. As soon as we released the personal brain, we got hundreds of people saying, I want this, I want that, and it's a difficult problem to weigh. What do you pursue, and what things are most important? I am going to show you our next generation of products here, which does allow some of the things that you mentioned. But kind of the key for us as software designers and developers is in choosing all the right extensions to the system, which enable it to remain simple enough to use for the everyday user that doesn't want to, mess with too much, and sophisticated enough to express the rich semantics that things like labeling of links would allow. Has anyone here actually not seen the brain before? Okay. Do you have any reactions? I mean, it's pretty different to what people normally are used to. What we've tried to do is really separate this wave of interface from everything else. That's why we chose to go with a black background and animation and so forth. Victoria. I can't say that I'm familiar with all of it. I am aware of the efforts at Xerox PARC.
But was this before you
Well, as I said, I started working on it actually close to 10 years ago now. And when I was 18 maybe. So it was a long time ago. Yes.
That's impressive.
Thank you. But yeah, when I started working on it, you know, none of that stuff was out there, so to speak. Obviously, we didn't have it quite to this stage at that time. But
When did you start playing with computers?
I was 6 years old. My father bought a computer to run his business, and as it turned out, it wasn't capable of doing that, so I got it as an expensive toy.
You were self-taught, or you actually had someone who mentored you?
Well, the vast majority of what I learned on my own. And when I came down to LA to start the business, was really the first time that I started working with other, you know, professional computer programmers or designers.
Where was this? Where did you come?
I actually came from Canada, from Edmonton, Canada. So actually, when I came up with the idea for the brain, it was a difficult time in my life, I guess. I had just dropped out of school, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and my family was having problems, and it was kind of, what are you going to do with your life? So I came up with this, I don't know, maybe as an escape of some kind. It's written in, well, this particular version is written in C++. The enterprise products and kind of our next generation of stuff is Java. We have all types of initiatives in progress. None of them are tied to any particular technologies, but as I go through to the enterprise products, I'll start to get into that. Okay.
Do you have any brain of your connections?
I do.
Let me see that.
Unfortunately, I did not bring it. My laptop is in the shop. So this is a borrowed laptop, which I've not used before. I could, but I don't have it. I don't have it. I don't have it publicly available. Let me show you to the next layer of stuff that we're working on.
You realize you're in a class. And our subject is networking and processing.
I heard that as I was setting up. No, my brain is actually pretty interesting, and I'm sorry I couldn't. I'm sorry I couldn't bring it.
Do you have other examples of interesting brain other than corporate and international? That's not that. Just seriously, I'm not making fun. I thought
Michael Century, who is also from Canada, has a kind of very interesting associative network that is explain. Yeah, do you know Michael Century?
I'm not familiar with him, no.
He's an artist, but he's worked quite a lot with Canadian traditions of all kinds of other
Okay.
knowledge organizational stuff, and he produced some software that was kind of interesting, creating, storing and creating knowledge via social links with sort of clouds. He used the network clouds.
Okay.
You go within this to the cloud to get where you would be, and that opens up another cloud which is more ephemeral as you get to the edges. You know, it's very similar, but I mean, with Victoria raising the question of other minds, and since he's probably living next door to you when you were 6 and he was 5,
Right.
10 or something like that, I just wondered if you knew anything about it.
No, I don't know his work actually, but you know, if you guys are interested in other things like this, kind of the top things that come to mind. Well, there's Insight's hyperbolic tree, which is Xerox PARC offshoot, which is an interesting way of organizing hierarchies of information. It's not a network, but it is visually intriguing. There is the Apple's Project X, also known as hot sauce. It's pretty hard to find now, but it's out there somewhere. That one uses kind of a planet metaphor, where you have planets orbiting suns and then moons and so forth. But that's, again, a hierarchical representation. At one time, there was a company called Perspecta, which was, what's her name? Well, at any rate, it's the students of a very famous professor at MIT that launched this company, which again had a kind of a zooming interface where you would kind of fly through information. The other one, there's another one called ThinkMap you should check out. That's an interesting one. They actually do, they're actually quite a bit more focused on the visual aspects of it, whereas we've focused much more on the collaboration and process management and kind of knowledge integration aspects of the technology. Those are probably the top things that come to mind. Yes, yes. Plum Design Visual Thesaurus, they call it. Yeah. So let me take you through the evolution of where we went to from the personal brain. The first thing you'll note here is that I've brought up a brain which is inside of a web browser, so it's on the network. It's not my brain, but it is on the network. And the significance of it being on the network, of course, is that as people create information, it's instantaneously shared and available to everyone else, right? One of the big limitations of corporate intranets is that they have only a single person, the webmaster, who can go and modify the information and grow it out. And it's very difficult for the actual people that tend to be working on the information to extend it out. So one of the strengths of the brain, of course, is that the networks are not only easy to browse, but they're easy to expand. So for instance, if I go into here, and let's just see. So I have education in here. I want to add a new area under the public sector. And I'm going to call this education. So I can simply drag and drop to create a new piece of information. And I'm going to call this a company, even though it's an organization. And I can expand the network interactively as I work with the system. This is something that's pretty unique in the brain, in that it allows people to create new connections and create new nodes of information instantaneously. Absolutely, yes. There's a lot of layers to this product. We call this next generation the Brain EKP, or Enterprise Knowledge Platform. Let me see if I have the diagram here. Sorry, I didn't actually... Okay, so these are the four key components of the Brain EKP, and basically we've taken the visual user interface layer and expanded out from that. And we have three things happening here. There's what we call the universal data access, which allows us to take this interface and connect up on the back end to any information source. Okay? So when we go into enterprise customers, they have large data structures in relational databases or in document management systems or on their files or on their intranets or what have you, where they have many different connections that are already existing, right? So what universal data access allows us to do is to take all those pieces of information and visualize them in the same way that you've seen with the brain. So this lets us have all of these different repositories of information in one single abstract layer, so that you can visually tie together related pieces of information from different systems. Okay? And then we have what we call integrated collaboration, which allows you to do things like share files, have discussions, create email lists, all within the context of all the connected information that you have inside of the brain. And then the third new layer is what we call the knowledge model. And the knowledge model is probably the most difficult to explain. But basically the idea is that we're putting a layer of information on top of all these connections, which types the information and describes the patterns that generally tend to occur within those pieces of information. So I'll try and explain that better through the demonstration. So inside of here, what you can see is that all the different thoughts inside the brain have different icons next to them. And those icons, as well as the coloring, represent what types of information those are. So in this case, we have different industries. And in the industries, the defense industry, we have different companies. So once you get to a company, you can see a rich network of relationships that show the people related to the company.
Is that an actual company, Empire Corporation?
No, it's not. GE Equity, of course, is real. But I'll show you. This is the inspiration for the empire right there.
It wouldn't surprise me, actually.
No. So all of the different colors and the different icons represent the types of information. So for instance, when I mouse over on top of Empire Corporation, you can see that it's a company. Telecommunications, of course, is an industry, as is defense. This is another company. Here we have a board of directors, senior management, products, and so forth. Can you multi-type and group type? No. One piece of information can only be one type of information. You can have it connected to other pieces of information that are of a different type, of course. All right? I'm not sure what you mean by group typing.
Hierarchical typing. So if you say this
Inheritance in the types?
employee also was a member of senior staff.
Yeah, yeah.
Belong to all.
Yeah. Well, when you get into those kinds of, well, for instance, with an employee, you might want to have a type which is an employee, and an employee can be a member of a group, right? But that's a relationship. Like, let me show you. So, for instance, let's take this person right here. So, Jill Swanson is a associate or analyst, right? Who is managed by a vice president and who is the GE contact for Empire Corporation, right? So through the labeling of the links, we're able to get all those relationships in. There's a second level of complexity which we haven't implemented yet, which is basically inheritance. So that you could say Jill Swanson is an associate analyst, and all associate analysts are people, and all people are, you know, objects or what have you, right? But we haven't gone to that level yet. But basically what the knowledge model allows us to do, what the typing of information allows us to do, is to set expectations for how a piece of information can be used. Okay? So if you think about how a file folder system is used, every piece of information that you put into that system is just a file or a folder. The computer itself, or the shared information system, has no other context other than this is a file in this folder in this subfolder, right? When in reality, those files and those folders actually represent entities in the world, right? They may represent people, they may represent projects, they may represent concepts or ideas or organizations, and all of these things are very important as to what can be done with those objects, right? So what we're trying to do is add the process for information, how information interconnects, and how people act on information into the system itself, okay? So for instance, I might say that a company can be related to a product with a relationship of company sells product, right? And by mapping out all those relationships in what we've called the knowledge model, you help give people a context for how information should be used and what they can do with it. Okay?
That brings up a point. Since you're labeling the relationship as a cell relationship, you have multiple links between two identical items in multiple ways.
Right, right. The short answer is no, you cannot. If you want to do that kind of thing, then what we would do is break out additional objects within the two objects and interconnect them, right? But I mean, there's no reason you can't do that theoretically, but as of today, that's not something we've built. Let me just walk through a demonstration of how this works. I think it'll trigger some ideas for everyone. So what we've done here, this example, I should have explained this when we started, but this example is all built around an investment process. GE Equity is the venture capital arm of General Electric, and they have people who all they do all day long is look for companies to invest in and then try and make those companies successful, okay? So there's a complex process that's evolved which captures all the activities involved in doing that. And what we've done in this brain, and what we strive to do in every deployment of our technology, is to bring together all of the information relevant to that process, all of the business rules relevant to that process, or organizational rules as it may be, as well as the people involved in that process. So this brain integrates all three of those. And what happens is, I'm going to pretend that we're an investor working at GE Equity, and we're going to walk through the entire investment process. So the first thing that I want to do is go and find a deal to do investment in. So I click on prospecting, which is what they call looking for a deal. And here we have a connection called resources, which lays out all the different resources that an investor might use to go and find a company to invest in. Okay? And all of these resources, of course, can be pre-populated by the management, or they can also be collaboratively built by the team itself. Okay? Somebody asked a question about security earlier on. Each one of these items has levels of permissions that say this object can be modified by these people and seen by these people and linked to by this other group of people. So as I go through here, I go in and say I want to look at the resources. They have connected here the different analysts firms that they use, the magazines they read, the conferences they go to, and so forth. So let's just say that they're going to go to the Knowledge Management World Conference. Okay? So when they click on this, what they see is the conference information below, and they can see the industry that conference is focused on. And when they go to the conference, they can come back and find out that there's a company in that space that they want to invest in. And let's just create a new one here. Hope I spelled that right. Put myself on the line there. So there's a company called Networks and Consciousness in the knowledge management space. So they create that new piece of information, and once they've done that, they can then go in and, of course, add any information that they want to that. So if they wanted to add a link to a website, for instance, they can click Add and type in the name of the site they want to attach. Do you guys have a website? Yeah. Is it very hard to type in? VV? Classes? Teaching. Okay. Okay, it's not. It's not actually that important. Okay. 401. S02. Okay. Okay, is that it? All right. Okay, well, hopefully that'll work. So, there we go. Okay, so, very nice. So what you can do now is you can put this piece of information. I should have. Let's do that. You can put this information in here, and now anyone else that. Okay, anyone else that comes into this brain now can see all the information about this organization and any contacts that we meet at the show, the areas that they're focused in, and so forth. Right. So as you build this up now, all the information that I add here obviously is shared with everyone else in my team. Right? I can also go in and actually carry out discussions inside of here. So and each individual that's part of the team can come in and say, make whatever comments they want. It all gets shared and captured as a running discussion, right? And we also have the capability of integrating email into that, so that as people are exchanging information through email, it can get captured and indexed as part of the shared repository. Okay. The other thing that that's most significant about this is that each one of these pieces of information, each thought, can have other things attached to it. But by typing the information and giving it explicit meaning to the system itself, we're able to add actions onto information. So in this case, what we've done is we have the ability to take this company and turn it into a prospect for investment. Okay? And this is a command or an action which has been custom built for this particular business process. So when I click that, when I click that, what you can see is it has connected now this company to the list of prospects. Okay, so that means now that if there were other things that were in process right now, I would be able to see them right here. So for a group of people who are working together, you can keep yourself in sync as a result of all working together in a shared project space. Okay, so what we're trying to do is gain some of the benefits of physical proximity, where if you have several people all working on the same project, they're all in the same room, they kind of naturally bump into each other and find out what each other are doing. Well, by working in the shared space here, you create connections between things so that as you're moving through the information, you bump into other relevant topics. Okay. So the other thing that it did is, what you can see is it's changed the state of this object. So it's changed from a simple company into a prospect. And as a prospect, it has a different set of actions available for it. The person can kill the deal or move it to the next stage and turn it into a qualified lead. And when they turn it into a qualified lead, as you can see, again, the status has changed, and we now are connected to the list of two other companies which are in this stage. Okay? And the other thing that it did was it created two pieces of information which are particular to this business process. So when GE Equity takes a company and turns it into a qualified lead, they need to go and develop a company profile and a market analysis which they tie into the whole process. Okay? So what we're trying to do here is capture the way that people work so that they can develop a consistent way of thinking about things and develop really a shared understanding of where a piece of information is. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Basically targeting companies who are buying and selling, investing. It's a particular target. And in fact,
Well-
following your, I think I downloaded the very first version of the web that came out, and occasionally would tap that into it. And it was very clear that moving more and more, actually in the beginning, but more and more into kind of a large corporate application.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, we even connected a little bit, or there was some interest to connect to the educational realm, but that quickly faded.
Yeah.
Was it because it was strictly financially not interesting?
Well, the reality of the situation today, particularly in today's economy, is that we have to focus on what generates us the most revenue. We didn't find. We had a lot of interest from many different universities and students and so forth in working with the brain and developing things, but none of them had any money. So we would try and help them and give them licenses to our stuff at reduced rates and so forth. But it just wasn't feasible for the company to continue to do that. So the reason why we've focused on large organizations is because they have the money.
So can you talk about your own evolution from the time you came from Canada
Sure.
to LA? What was your first link to LA? In other words, did you have a friend or someone that you came to LA to see? Did you already have a company lead? How did you progress and start making your own things?
Sure. Before I answer that, let me just address one other thing that you said earlier, which is the focus of the company in terms of the types of businesses we're selling to. What we're trying to do, where we've been led in effect by the money, is to all the businesses and organizations whose key asset is really the knowledge of their employees, right? The computer systems that these companies have built are largely full of information without context, right? In other words, they have a file that describes something, or they have a database record that says something, but the person that knows what that information means is really the key to doing anything with it. And what the brains enable us to do, or enable them to do rather, is to have more than just that one person able to act on the information. So yes, people that are buying and selling things, also people that are supporting things, also people that are doing research, and research can mean a variety of things. We do have one of our largest customers is the Department of Defense. And we're actually working with several of the intelligence agencies on projects Yeah, that's an interesting kind of area for us as well.
How did you start connecting to the department of the defense? How did that happen? Actually, no,
Let me start from the beginning.
the whole story.
Sure. Well,
So you came to LA.
yeah. Well, I didn't come to LA immediately, actually. I developed the prototype of the product on my own for a couple of years, and my friend, who is a music video director, moved down to LA to pursue his dreams, and hooked up with this company, which was fairly ambitious in its goals. They thought they could do everything. They weren't exactly right in the end, but they did do some interesting things. They told, or my friend told them about what I was doing. I sent them down some documents describing kind of the core ideas, and within a couple months, I was on a plane with a 386 laptop to do a demonstration. And I came down here in the summer of '95, I think, '94. And by January of '95, I was living in LA and had secured, a 6-7 figure chunk of money to try and do something with.
From the company that brought you out, where your friend was working for, or?
We actually created a new company.
I see. So that company saw your demo. What happened? They got really excited.
It's actually the individuals that were running the company my friend was working for heard about what I was doing. I talked to them and pitched them on the idea, and together we formed a new company, which ran the development of the original product. So I first moved down to LA then, and I pretty much came here not knowing anybody and not really exactly knowing how I was going to get this done. But within a couple months, I had rented an office space and hired a few programmers, and 2.5 years later, we released the first product. So that's kind of the story of how we got started. And then from there, once the product was out, there were a few kind of key influencers who I met and who got the product into various companies and initiatives, which led us to all our clients now. But one thing that I will say about that, which was an interesting part of the whole development process, was that the people that you meet and convert to your ideas are really the key to making them successful. You can have the greatest technology in the world, but if nobody knows about it, that's a problem, obviously. But it's quite amazing how effective one person who really believes in it, who's in the right place, can be. For us, there was an analyst who worked for Esther Dyson. I don't know if you all know who Esther Dyson is, but she was one of the first computer journalists and is now very influential. But his name was Jerry Michalski, and he wrote an article about us in '97, right before the product was released, that was, very very complimentary, and that kind of launched our company. So, well.
You started yourself with how many programmers and how do they shift and
The company has been through a pretty wide swing of numbers. When I started this, the kind of .com investment craze hadn't seen the light of day yet. So it was a very different approach. People thought you actually had to start making money before you could hire a zillion people. So we grew slowly, and eventually we got up to 6 or 7 people, right? And then by the time we released the product, the dot-com boom was in full effect. And we brought on some outside investment in 2000 and also last year. But over the course of the company's life, we've raised over $20 million. And the company has grown and shrunk from as few as 5 people to as many as over 40 to where we are now, which is about 25.
So how did you connect with DoD, and what is the difference? That's a very different mindset that you're working with from the corporate
To the
management.
right to the defense and intelligence agencies.
Yeah, I mean, of course, universities are very familiar with that, because that's where
Right.
a lot of funding comes from. But
Right.
I'm just curious, is this a trend that's happening now because there's less investment going on in smaller companies? Do you see more and more of your peers turning to defense and
Well, there's only a few people who really can. Most of the companies that came up in the dot-com era, don't have anything to offer to anybody. So they're kind of out of luck. Some of the software companies and technology companies are trying to go that route. I wouldn't say it's dramatic, but there is a venture capital group started by the CIA, which was an interesting event.
it's still active, isn't it?
Yes.
What's the name of it?
It's called InQtel.
That's right.
InQtel.
Right?
Right. Yeah, they incubate small companies that they think could be key to their own internal technology workings. So, yeah, I mean, most of the connections that we get, most of the leads that we get, and new footholds in industries come from individual users who've downloaded our product and have found it to be useful to them individually and see, specific places where it can be applied to their businesses. We, I don't know if anyone saw on Discovery Channel, there's a series of programs covering the terrorist events and the CIA and the FBI and all the organizations behind it. But they regularly show scenes of the brain in the program. But we have no idea who it is that's that's doing that. But 500,000 people out there using the product gets you a lot of leads. So and that's one way. Another one which was fairly interesting. Can't remember who made the introduction for us, but the CIA had a group called Nomogenesis, which was I can't remember exactly what it means, but it's like, the new beginning, the new way of working for the CIA. We kind of had a funny thing happen to us when we were starting our relationship with them. They flew down to our offices and they said, the CIA is almost out of work. We have to figure out what we're going to do next. This is
before 9/11.
yes. This is excuse me. I think they're back in business now. Yeah, they can relax. Well, at least from that side of the fence. But basically, they said, the Cold War is over, and we don't know what we're doing now. We have to change the way we work. The way that our culture has been brought up is all around, hoarding information, need-to-know basis, and all that kind of stuff. And they saw, several technologies as being one aspect of changing the culture. So they had this group called Nomogenesis, made up of ourselves and 5 or 6 other companies that would get together on a regular basis to try and brainstorm on how to change things. So, yeah, no, I was pleasantly surprised by the level of expertise and dedication that you find at these government agencies. I'm from Canada, so I'm used to big bureaucracies that don't do very much. But the people that are running these organizations, at least in my experience, are among the best and brightest. Certainly, compare very favorably with their counterparts in industry.
So what's your goal now? Your 10-year vision. How do you see yourself moving forward?
I don't know. I can. Well, the vision for the product.
Not for the product, for you.
For me personally,
Yeah.
it's difficult for me to think about that. It's a.
What's your, just, you must see yourself, you talk about people who get excited about what you do, and they can become evangelists for some of your ideas. That to me seems like, it gives me a hint that you have these visions of how things should be visualized, organized. So you obviously have an image of the role you can play, and it's a kind of great ambitious start. But if you remove yourself from the funding, the money, just think about what's your role on this planet. What you would like to achieve, right? Where do you see yourself? Where do you see yourself going when you're like 60? Who are you aspiring to as a human being?
Well,
Outside of business?
it's a good question. I think I'm among the fortunate few who had a dream when they were young and managed to pursue it for their full-time career. From when I was very young, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to have my own software company and change the world, so to speak. When I was 8 years old, I met Steve Jobs. He came out to speak at an educational conference. I walked up to him and looked at him, and he said, "Hi." That was about it. But I always looked at people like that as being, I don't know, I guess my idols of sorts when I was very young. So the dream is to build a successful company and be able to turn my ideas into reality and change the way that people work with information. I'm sorry?
Don't want to sell sugar water.
No. Right. Yeah, no, it's actually amazing how small the industry is. On my first big conference after we released Personal Brain, I actually met John Scully, and it's like I was astounded at how few people there actually are in the industry.
Do you read, what do you read that inspires you? What kind of books do you read?
Well, I would say probably my greatest inspiration in creating the brain. I never realized this when I first did it, but kind of looking back on it now, it's not actually a book, it's a movie. It's Tron. I don't know how many of you have seen Tron, but I saw Tron in the theater 7 times as a kid. And I just recently got it on DVD and watched it, and I was like, oh, wow, that looks just like the brain. So, you know, I read science fiction, you know, or I used to read science fiction a lot. I don't read that much anymore. I'm too busy. But you know, that was certainly a big inspiration. Ayn Rand was always one of my favorite authors. Read a lot of Ayn Rand when I was in high school. You know, the other book which is has an interesting parallel is Neuromancer. I'm sure you've all read Neuromancer. There's a passage in Neuromancer where he's describing the matrix, and it says, you know, lines of light receding in non-space of the mind, clusters of data, something, I don't remember exactly. But I read that about 6 months or a year after we had named all the different aspects of the technology. You know, the obvious things came right away. We had the brain, we had thoughts and things like that. But we didn't know what to call the structure itself. We wound up calling it the matrix. We wound up calling the displays clusters. And there's this one paragraph where there's like 5 of the same words that we used all together in one place. So that's pretty funny.
Do you see any evolution of this in your research towards a space which is like off the screen? And you see that the way of accessing knowledge and working with the brain might move away from a screen to some other dimension or some other body or some other host?
Well, there's people working on things like that, certainly. It's.
But you're happy to remain with the screens, or is it? I mean, I'm looking. You've got a long time ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could get boring.
Like palm devices and projection.
Yeah, there's.
Graphic
Right. We actually have a prototype of the brain which works on a palm, and we went into.
When I met you 3 years ago, whatever happened to that?
It wasn't financially feasible to pursue. We also did a prototype.
Can't you do like a little part of your company? Every really interesting company had their own research that was not necessarily related
Right.
to their profit.
Right.
It seems to me you're limiting a lot of these ideas because it's not actually feasible.
Well, at some point we'll be able to.
Universities, you're not doing it's actually looked good. Whenever you download it,
Right.
Right.
Right. At some point, you know, the dream is to be able to pursue these things. I certainly expect that they would all turn financially feasible, just not in the short term.
How big do you have to be for those ideas to become something, for you to have a playground, a sandbox?
I mean, I don't know that there's any magic number, but we certainly have to be profitable, you know, which we're
Are
not
you
today.
profitable
No,
now? You're not still.
no, no. It's been a long time, but you know, still slugging away. So it's not easy. Yeah, I mean, to get back to the original question, you know, the palm devices certainly. The advent of the tablet computer, or the removable screen. I don't know if you guys have been following Microsoft's recent announcements, but they've announced an LCD screen that you can detach from your computer and walk around with and touch. So the touchscreen interface is very much something that that works very well with the brain. There was actually a research group, part of Accenture, in London that's using the brain that way. They have I can't remember what exactly they call themselves. Oh, they call themselves the Third Millennium Forum, and they take the CEOs of large organizations there to kind of reset their expectations. And one of the
Get them all together and press the reset.
exactly. And one of the things that they use to do that is a brain which is projected on a screen, not quite this large, but so that you can actually walk up to it and touch it, right? Which is pretty effective as a kind of a visceral effect. The other kind of evolving interface, I guess, which could be interesting at some point in the near future, is these heads-up displays. And I haven't been pursuing it closely, but perhaps you guys know more about it. The idea that you could carry your brain with you has always been something that's been very intriguing. So you can have kind of a constant reference to the world and your context within it.
On a platform standpoint, we're talking about this. I know this is running on its own web port. JSP that, and I know you have a Windows client. You have Linux clients. What I'm getting at more generally is that, to me, this really screams of, instead of being like an interface to your information, it's almost a replacement for your file system. But, instead of having trees with directories, subdirectories, you could have this, emulate that,
Right.
run some sort of OS on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. You could.
Given that type, is that in your plans? Do you have multi-platform?
Well, I mean, sort of. The vision for the technology has always been, and kind of one of the guiding principles or philosophies behind everything we do has always been that, people shouldn't have to think about where information comes from or where they're storing it or any of that, right? It's really kind of a, that's under the hood, so to speak. What we're trying to do is abstract the information itself and the relationships and so forth out from the storage media, right? So that's why we don't really want to go in and just, visualize your C drive, right? It's not that interesting.
When I first downloaded it, I'm like, well, all this is doing is this was 2 years ago.
Right.
It's revisualizing everything that I already know where it is anyway.
Right.
But if I was to get it and instead, take like a microkernel of an OS, take a Linux or something like that, replace exe2 with a file system that actually has the connection built into it,
Right.
and then emulate that for other things in the OS to work.
Yep. That's actually something that we've talked to a couple vendors about. Most of them are not around anymore, but I don't know if you guys remember when the what do they call it, the network application. Is that what they called it? The network application was like the hot thing. You'd have your microwave and then you'd have your computer or whatever. But there were a couple companies that were trying to build new operating systems using like BOS or Linux as the kernel, and they wanted to have a much more friendly kind of storage interface, and tying the brain to something at the kind of hardware level or operating system level would be something that's very powerful, but something we can only really undertake properly in combination with a partner.
What about Oracle?
I'm sorry?
Oracle. I mean, they have their own.
The network computer, you mean? Or what about Oracle?
Well, they were working on network appliances for one
Yep.
thing, and they have their own file system that they run on another level.
Yep. I mean, there's certainly candidates, but without, that's not our core business. We're not going to go out and pursue that. If somebody comes to us and says, "Hey, we think this would be great," then that's another thing. It's another story. Any other questions?
Thought about expanding the artificial intelligence.
I'm sorry?
Getting AI to connect the information.
Or connecting networks.
That's actually something that, I'm sorry, what was that?
Or connecting, having AI look for potential connection with other.
That's a topic that that has come up, time and time again. And every time I always say, well, if we can get the computer to do that effectively, then I will retire. Well, we've talked to most of the companies in the space and are very familiar with all of them. And the most promising one that I've seen was a technology being developed by Lernout and Houseby. And we were in serious discussions with them right before they got killed. I don't know if you guys remember Lernout and Houseby. It was the Enron of the technology sector last year. But at any rate, well, they were falsifying their income, and they would invest in companies and have those companies buy products from them, and just like. No, they were based in Belgium. But at any rate, they had some very good artificial intelligence people there and linguistics people that were working on some very sophisticated ways of parsing information and understanding it. But even then, you get connections that don't add a lot of value, is what you get. They can mine the obvious things, but the obvious things aren't what's interesting.
Well, what strikes me as potentially being useful is in a small space of information, human intelligence can prevail. But if you have a humongous space of information, then the primary value of your product will probably be a deep search technique, and that's where AI will probably come in.
Yep. Yeah. No, I shouldn't say that I've completely given up on it. We do have relationships with a lot of those companies. And I don't know how familiar you are with them, but there's Stratify, Semio, Autonomy, Lotus has one, and we have official relationships with 3 of the 4 I just mentioned. So, but it's kind of a dream, You walk into a company and you say, you've got all this information, it's disorganized. Well, we're going to visualize it for you, and we're going to have this computer go in and organize it all for you, right? And it sounds wonderful, and they're like, oh, great, how much does it cost? But the reality of deploying those systems is always that they turn out to be somewhat of a disappointment. You can do high-level stuff where you say, well, I want all my business correspondence here and my personal correspondence there, but it doesn't. The more granularity you break it down into, the less relevant things become.
Is it just the top level it looks for, the names of documents, or can you actually search?
The search that we've implemented actually searches everything that you have, including the names of the information as well as the actual content. So if you have a Word document or a PowerPoint or whatever, or a web page hooked up, it'll spider out that web page and so forth. One of the things that we found powerful about that, just in this whole space of knowledge management or information management, search has kind of been the world's answer. You've got too much stuff, well, just search for it, right? But the problem with that has always been that searching for information is great as long as you know what you're searching for, right? So if you know that you want information on a particular class, for instance, then you type in the name of the class, goes and searches for it, and it pulls it up, right? But if you don't know what the class is called, you're kind of out of luck, right?
Well, you're allowed to, your technology will allow it to give context to it.
Exactly.
So you could search for things that are related to or whatever.
Right, and then browse to it and find it that way. So the combination of the brain's connected network and a full search, full indexed search, proves to be quite effective.
Getting back to the plasticity of the brain itself, in this huge period of 35 years plus, so this could be 45, 55 years plus, how I mean, all things being where I was about to be very confident and so on, that the separation, the distinction between software and hardware isn't there. To think software, when you start thinking hardware. I mean, for innovation, particularly on top of the market, really getting towards a new plastic brain, so to speak. Well, not so to speak, actually. But you sort of made it.
I'm not sure I'm quite following the question.
Well, I'm getting off the screen again, wondering not as a sort of pipe dream or something, but as a financial and life necessity. How long companies would be able to keep a distinction between software and hardware. At the moment, no doubt you have those sort of contacts with hardware which make suggestions to companies that something
Right.
on the screen itself and so on.
Right.
I don't, it's your business, not mine, but since your business is the brain,
Right.
and that kind of cognitive processing that you're emulating, I'm wondering how long you can go and stay ahead of everything, which would be really good. I mean, and not take into consideration directly into your research into your company, hardware development, beyond the computer, beyond the box, beyond the screen.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It's a good question.
Just that we've got the not the shadow, but the rising sun of nanotechnology
Right.
appearing on the horizon here.
Right.
I'm wondering where that interfaces over the next 45 years.
You should use more science fiction.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
Neuromancer came out of it. Now you
Yeah.
have no time to read. It's a problem.
Yeah. I mean, I look forward to the day when I have to seriously consider what's happening in hardware. You know, I mean, to be perfectly frank, you know, in today's environment, you know, there's a million things out there that people are working on. You know, from voice recognition to, you know, projectors into people's eyes to, you know, thought pattern recognition. I mean, they're all out there, right? But in order for those to become relevant, the time frame is just it's just not conceivable to even start thinking about what we might do with those things. You know, at some point, you know, maybe we'll become a successful, very successful company, and we'll be able to fund, you know, a separate company that says, okay, I'm going to go and figure out how to apply the brain and, you know, X technology. You know, in terms of the evolution of the industry, the big trend that I see in the future that is, I think, looming on the horizon is the emergence of content and communication standards as being, you know, the real kind of driver for the next wave of innovation. You know, today, well, not today. In the past, you had hardware as the kind of key platform, which dominated the direction of the industry, right? You know, Apple introduces the Apple II, IBM introduces the PC. You know, Apple comes out with the Mac. Now, those are exciting hardware times, right? Most of you probably don't remember that, and I probably shouldn't remember that. But you know, today, nobody introduces new hardware. It's interesting, right? They introduce new types of hardware, but there's nothing that changes the shape of the industry. You know, save for maybe the PDA. But it doesn't happen that often anymore. It used to happen every 6 months, right? Somebody would say, this is the new thing, right? And then you went to a period where you know, software was kind of the king, right? And you know, spreadsheets, databases, web browsers, and so forth. That was the big industry news. But today, the emergence of standards for communication, and as a result, the content which is at the back ends of all those communications, I think that is going to become the next wave of a platform to develop on, so to speak. And if you think about, even this university, you guys are doing all kinds of interesting things, and if you had a standardized way to offer that information, so that it could be sold and reused as part of another product, the dynamics of the education environment would change dramatically, right? That's just one small example. Other things, research institutes, for instance, could exist on their own as profitable organizations instead of having to be babysat by some giant conglomeration. And product offerings could be built around the integration or the tying together of different pieces of content. So, anyway, it's a long way off, or a short way off.
So all of your end nodes are documents?
They don't have to be documents. Excuse me.
I'm thinking is, how Bluetooth, for instance, will take a hardware device and say, here I am, here's what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't you have an end node that's a piece of hardware that says, you can interface with me this way, this is what I can do?
Yeah, you can hook up actual functionality to the end nodes, right? So you can have a little program, in effect, that runs at that location, right? So that you might have, for instance, I can't think of a good example at the moment, but you might have a node which connected to a piece of hardware that detected, the number of people in a room, right? And then you'd have a node that represented that room, which talks to the hardware and then displays the people as connections underneath there, right? Those types of integrations are relatively easy to do today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, also for letting us look behind the scenes of the brain, and also for being open to answer all the questions.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Very much.
If anyone has other things they'd like to talk about or what have you, I'll leave a stack of business cards up here. So, thank you.